Hello YouTube, it is your boy B3 back with another kicking movie reaction review. Today I had a crazy day, so I wanted to do one of my favorite things in the world, watch a monster movie. And since we're still going through all the Invisible Man films, today we are reviewing The Invisible Man's Revenge from 1944. It is a sci-fi horror film that runs about an hour and 18 minutes. So Invisible Man, for this film, it's kind of gone back to its roots as sci-fi horror, because there were two sci-fi horror films, and then there was a straight comedy, like a comedy, and then there was like a war espionage film. But now we have back to the horror genre, which was very nice. And it's also kind of a reboot. It's a bit of a reboot, because it does not appear to be in continuity with the others. But the Invisible Man, the main character, the Invisible Man, he has the last name as the original Invisible Man. But in this film, there appears to be no precedent for invisible people, which means in the continuity of this film, it seems like the Invisible Man, Return of the Invisible Man, the Invisible Woman, and the Invisible Agent, it seems like none of them happened in the continuity of this film, which is very interesting. Because I thought for sure it was going to be a sequel to Invisible Agent. Like, I really thought it was going to be a sequel to The Invisible Agent. But it doesn't appear to be. It seems to be a new Griffin, played by John Hall, who also played the Invisible Man in the last film. And in the last film, The Invisible Agent, he played the grandson of the original Invisible Man. And in this one, he's just another guy named Griffin. So I do think that this film is, in fact, a reboot and is not part of the main series. So the main, I feel like there's two, the first two, and then Invisible Agent are like a trilogy. Invisible Woman stands on its own, and then The Invisible Man's Revenge stands on its own, in my opinion. A criminal haunts his enemy's mansion after a mad scientist makes him invisible, which isn't entirely a good way to describe it, but I'll tell you more about it in a sec. It's got a 5.8 out of 10 on IMDb, 40% on Rotten Tomatoes, and one of those is kind of average, one of those is a little low, but 76% of Google users like the film, and that's pretty good. It was released on June 9th, 1944, directed by Ford Bebe. The box office was $765,700, but the budget was $314,790. So it didn't make near as much as The Invisible Agent, but that kind of makes sense because The Invisible Agent was a film taking place in World War II that was kind of like a very pro-Allies, kind of propaganda-y film that came out about World War II during World War II. So that kind of makes sense that that film was really popular. And this one just didn't do near as well. And it is from the Universal Horror, kind of Universal Monsters film series. I don't really super see the Invisible Man as a quote-unquote monster, but he is part of the monster lineup, and not just the general horror lineup, which includes the monsters. It's starring John Hall as our Invisible Man. John Carradine is the doctor that turns him invisible. He actually was Dracula at some point. We got Evelyn Ankers, Alan Curtis, Gail Sondergaard, Lester Matthews, and Leon Earl as well. Lots of them are pretty recognizable to me. Like, I definitely recognize Lester Matthews and Leon Earl, etc. So yeah, this film starts with a man called Robert Griffin kind of smuggling himself into this city, and it turns out he's been believed dead this whole time, but he's also been in an asylum. So he killed people in the asylum and escaped, and it turns out he was like injured and caught a big fever in a jungle expedition to find a diamond mine with this couple, and they were going to split it 50-50. The couple gets 50 because they live together and share the money, and then he was going to get 50% as well, and they were going to have this kind of like shared business interest in it. Fair, right? But he gets injured, catches a fever, and they're like, we can't stay behind with him, but they left their guide behind with him. And the guide eventually caught up to them and said he was dead. But he was not dead. It doesn't say if the guide lied because they didn't want to be left. It didn't say if the guide legitimately thought he was dead, but was just like a guide and didn't know medical stuff enough to be able to tell. I'm going to assume the second one, actually. Just, you know, to put a little faith in humanity. But he goes to their mansion and he's like, hey, what's up, my old friends? And they're so happy to see him. They're like, oh my god, you're alive. This is the best day. And then he goes, yeah, it is. Where's my money? And they're like, oh, we kind of lost the diamond mine on some bad investments, but... And then they're like, we're willing to give you half of our money in the bank. Like, they just straight up say that, which is very, very nice of them. They're like, yeah, we lost all the interest in the diamond mine. We're sorry about that, but we'll happily give you half of everything in our bank account. Which I'm assuming is a lot, because they live in a mansion. And he's like, no! Because remember, he's insane. He escaped from an insane asylum. Whatever happened to him in the jungle, like, I guess whatever fever he had, like, really messed up his brain or something. He also got hit on the head, so that could have had something to do with it, too. He has trauma and fever, which kind of both, I think, messed up his brain, I suppose. But he's like, no, I want everything the mine is worth right now. Give it to me. And he's like, we don't have that much money, man. And he's like, okay, then, well, I'll take your daughter. And they're like, you've never even met our daughter, dude. We can't give her to you. She's not a slave. She's not property. And he's like, I'm going to take your house. I'm going to take everything from you. Because he had the contract. And he actually had the contract. And he was like, I'll ruin you. And he even kind of threatens them, like, with physical violence and stuff. And he's, like, very obviously insane, right? And so they give him some alcohol and he passes out. And I'm pretty sure the wife drugged him. It doesn't say if she does or not, but she's the one that brought up that he should have a drink, and then he passes out after having it. I think that she drugged it, and then she was being all shady. She was like, we need to take the contract from him and send him out into the street. Just throw him out. And they do. And I was like, okay, the wife's being a little shady, and in the story it said she was the one that saw him get hit on the head. So I like for sure thought that she knocked him out and tried to kill him to get the money. And she was trying to get rid of the contract and stuff for that reason. I legit thought that that was it. I thought that she had done something wrong, and that was going to be revealed while he was invisible, and he's going to kill her or something. But the husband obviously had nothing to do with it. Like, he wanted to give the guy half his fortune. He wanted to get him help, and then she was like, no, we can't get him help. He's crazy. I mean, this is in the 40s mental health right now is not taken seriously in 2021. It definitely was not taken seriously in 1944. So, we got this, and then he almost drowns because he's so weak. He falls in the river, and a guy fishes him out, and this guy apparently, like, recognizes him and claims to be his friend, but he's actually kind of a con artist. He's trying to use people. He's a bit of a scumbag. And he's also a comedic relief character. He was sometimes he could be a little much, but not always. Once again, remember, if you've watched the other reviews, you know I say every time that because James Whale's Invisible Man, which was a huge hit, because that film had, like, invisible pranks, every Invisible Man movie in this series has to have invisible pranks. So that guy's like, I'll get you a lawyer and we'll do all this stuff, and then he tries to claim, like, oh, they tried to drown him and all this stuff, and he was like, nope, I have a witness. Someone saw me kick him out of my house. And the lawyer was like, you lied to me, and they bounce, and the constable shows up, and all this stuff, and then the Invisible Man kind of gets, like, run out of town. This is all before he's invisible, by the way, all before he's invisible, and he ends up at a doctor's place. And this doctor has a bunch of invisible animals that he experiments on. And he kind of manipulates this guy into volunteering to be invisible. And he knows he's a fugitive. But this guy, honestly, this doctor thinks that after he turns this guy invisible, he's just going to stick around to become famous, even though he's a fugitive. And I mean, that wouldn't be... I mean, that's what I would have done. If I was a fugitive, right, from the law, and a doctor told me he could turn me invisible and make me famous, I'd be like, I could just take a new... Especially in the 40s. Like, especially in the 40s. Today, you probably couldn't get away with it. But in the 40s, you could be like, yo... I can freaking get a whole new identity, be invisible, and be rich and famous. But instead of doing that, he wants revenge because he's crazy. The film is called The Invisible Man's Revenge, after all. So he turns him invisible. He bails on the doctor, goes back to the place, and instead, like, the description is like he haunts the mansion. And I thought he was going to be like torturing them and driving them insane, kind of like an Edgar Allan Poe kind of thing. And I was like, that'll be super cool to watch. But that's not what he does. Like, he sneaks into the house, he goes up to the husband, and he's like, hey, it's me, I'm invisible. You're gonna write a note signing over everything you own to me, or I'm gonna kill you. And I was like, that's your plan? You couldn't have done that as a visible person? Are you serious? Like, as a visible person, you still could have snuck in that unlocked window when he was in the room alone, threatened him with a knife, and said, sign everything over to me. You could have done that as a visible person. And then he does it. He gets it. He, like, reveals himself to both the couples. The dad is, like, really on edge, and it, like, almost drives... I say dad, because they do have a daughter. But it almost drives the wife insane. Like, she becomes bedridden and crazy, and we never see her again after that. So I guess... part of me feels like maybe they had the plot about her betraying him in there originally, but then there were like rewrites or something, and they decided to make him full-on villain. And then they were like, okay, so we got to cut out all the stuff with her betraying him, because then he seems more legitimate, and now we want to make him a villain. That's my theory. I don't know. It's so old that information like that can be hard to find. Like, etc. But, yeah, that's what I feel like, is that they originally had her as the villain and then rewrote it to have him as the villain because they wanted to go back to the roots. Because the invisible character hasn't been a villain since the first film. I think they were really trying to recapture the first film with this film. I think that's what was happening. Because in The Invisible Man, he's a bad guy. In The Invisible Man Returns, or Return of the Invisible Man, he's a good guy trying to prove his innocence. And then the Invisible Woman, she's a good guy. Invisible Agent, he's a good guy. And then this one, he's a villain again. So I think they're just trying to go back to the roots. And you can really see that in several parts of the film, that they're trying to go back to the roots. I do honestly think it is a reboot. Just straight up reboot. And it has been like yeah, it's been like 11 years since the original. So that's actually kind of reboot warranted time. I think they're 11 years apart or something like that. It's 33 to 44, so yeah, 11 years. But, so he gets this signed document that says, I turn everything over to Griffin, the Invisible Man. And then he doesn't use it. He just holds it over their heads to torture them instead. For real. That's what he does. So, and then he's like, all right, now I need some, then he goes back to the kind of con man-y poor guy, and he's like, I'm going to get evicted. I can't house you. And he's like, okay, I'll give you some money. We'll get you all the money in the world so that you can afford to stay here and harbor me. So they go to a bar, and this is where the comedic prank scene comes in. And they place a 5 quid bet. Well, no, 5 pounds, sorry. It was 5 quid, and then they upped it to 5 pounds. A 5 pound bet on a game of darts. And what the Invisible Man does is every time the guy pretends to throw a dart, the Invisible Man takes it, runs to the board, and plugs it in the bullseye. And I'm like, that'd be hard to get away with. The darts are moving so slowly, and they wouldn't be flying straight, and like, people would know something was up. And the guy who lost did. So they cheat on a bet for 5 measly pounds, which of course was more then than it is today, but still, I doubt it's enough to Like, he was like, I'll get you all the money in the world. I'm invisible. We can be rich. And then all they do is scam one guy out of £5. That's it. And I'm like, what? What are you talking? Is that all the money he owed? £5? Like, what? Insane! That was so stupid. No way he paid his rent. And then the Invisible Man goes back to the mansion and he's like, all right, I'm here for your daughter, who I've never met, by the way. I'm here to take your daughter as my property and marry her and probably do stuff to her without consent. It's very, ooh, it's creepy. And the dad's like, you can't get away with that. And he's like, yes, I can. I can get away with anything because I'm invisible. And then her dad's like, no, you can't get away with it because you're invisible. You can't get married. As soon as you try, like, you're gonna fucking get caught. They're gonna know who the Invisible Man is, because there's already starting to be some rumors about the Invisible Man. Because the idiot walked around in full clothes while invisible, with just, like, his head exposed, so everybody saw the Invisible Man, because he's an idiot. I don't know why they only have John Hall play the idiot Invisible Man. Because I mentioned that he was kind of an idiot in the Invisible Agent as well. If you haven't seen that review, it should be my most recent one. But, like, he's like, okay, well, I need to become visible. And he becomes visible kind of the same way that Vincent Price's Invisible Man became invisible in the sequel to the original, via blood transfusion. But in the Vincent Price one, he got blood from many, many people, and it kind of, like, thinned out the formula, so it was in a bunch of people's bloodstreams, but, like, not enough of it to turn anyone invisible or make them insane. This formula is a perfected one in this film. It just makes you invisible, nothing else. It doesn't drive you insane. He was already insane. So he goes back and he watches the doctor perform an experiment on his invisible dog, who is his trusted bodyguard and companion, and he turns the dog visible again. And then the Invisible Man busts in and is like, I saw that, now you make me visible. And he's like, I can't make you visible like I can a dog. I had to kill a dog to get enough blood to do this. Right? That's what he says. He's like, and also you wouldn't stay invisible like a dog would because your anatomies are so different and it takes different levels of the formula to turn you, a much larger human, invisible than it does a dog, etc., etc. It doesn't explain it as well as I just did, but that's kind of what I got from it. I'm pretty good at suspending belief and, like, kind of making up my own reasons for things. But sometimes it's just too far out there even for me. But, yeah, so he actually steals the doctor's blood, performs a blood transfusion on himself, which I'm sure had to be extremely difficult. Performs a blood transfusion on himself with the doctor. It kills the doctor because it removes all the blood from the doctor. It's kind of the science around it doesn't really super check out, but it's still entertaining. So he takes all the blood from the doctor. It kills him. And then, well, it kills the doctor, not the Invisible Man, obviously. And then the Invisible Man, like, the dog is chained up this whole time, by the way, so he can't stop the Invisible Man. The Invisible Man then sets the place ablaze to cover his tracks, and steals the blood transfusion device so he can do it again later, because he knows he'll have to do it again later because he will turn invisible yet again. So, he runs away, the cops and a reporter show up, and this reporter is, in fact, engaged to the woman this guy wants to take as his property. So he's, like, got a feud against this guy. And then the doctor also gets a bad rap, because when the doctor dies, the police and everyone are like, he was a kook anyways. He deserved it. He created this monster. And it's like, the doctor just wanted to do science, man. He doesn't deserve all of this. He certainly didn't deserve to die. He didn't deserve to have his name smeared. Maybe he deserved, like a little something, but not much, man. So, he goes back and he's visible, and he's like, I'm visible now. Don't think about calling the police or trying to stop me. I can turn invisible anytime I want, which is a bluff. And I think I would have called that bluff, because he had to run away to turn visible. And so he's staying at their house under a false name. And he's like, this is my house now. Give me the keys. But also you and your wife and your daughter and your staff can all remain here. And it's like, he just wants them to stay there so he can psychologically torture them some more? And it's like, this dude is insane. He's more insane than the original Invisible Man. It's awesome. I love it. And so he's doing all that, and he's like deathly afraid of the dog, because the dog escapes during the fire, chases him down, and is constantly like patrolling outside the house, waiting for him to come out. It's like a reverse John Wick. The dog's master was killed, and the dog chased him all the way across town to get revenge, and is now stalking him outside of his house. It's so cool. And so he's hiding in the house, and he's afraid of this dog, so he sends that crony of his to kill the dog. And of course the crony screws it up because he's a comic relief character. And the police kind of catch on to him because they're like, this man was picked up near the scene of the fire and immediately dropped off at your house by a taxi guy. I think the taxi guy is like the brother of the killed man from Ghost of Frankenstein. The guy that talks like this, he does. I forget his name. The actor's name, I forget it, because I've always seen him in such small parts, it's hard to remember his name. But so the police are trying to kill him, and he's turning visible again, right? So he's like, oh man, I need to do a blood transfusion. And of course he does a blood transfusion with the fiancée of the woman he wants to conquer. And in the middle of the blood transfusion, the police and stuff bust in on him because they follow the dog, who sniffs him out after the dog gets in the house. And then the dog kills him. And it's awesome. And they don't put the dog down. They actually tout the dog as a hero. And they're like, he got revenge for his master. What a smart dog. And then the constable is like, he was judged by a higher court than ours. And I was like, yeah, he was. Dog a court. Dog backwards is God, after all. That dog judged his ass. Judge, jury, and executioner. I love it. I love the heroic vengeance reverse John Wick dog. It was the best part of the film. It was the best part of the film. I loved it. I loved the ending so much. This film does have a couple problems, yes, but at the end of the day, it's awesome. I loved it, and I loved the dog. Oh my god. And I gotta talk about John Hall. He played the heroic grandson of the original Invisible Man in Invisible Agent, and in this time he plays the crazed Invisible Man. I don't know why they decided to use him for both, but probably because the probably because the last one grossed so much. It like more than doubled its budget pretty easily. And they were like, wow, they must love John Hall. We'll bring John Hall back. And then they kind of made a film that was almost the opposite of the last one. And John Hall is a much more convincing villain than he was a hero. When I was watching him in Invisible Agent, I was like, he's a pretty standard heroic dude. You know, pretty standard stuff, nothing really interesting. In fact, there were times where I was like, he's an idiot. He's a terrible spy. They should have had a soldier do this and not a bartender. I was like, yeah, he could be a better hero. Excellent villain. He was so convincing. Like, there were times while I was watching this, because I watched Invisible Agent the day before, and then I watched this, and I was like, is this the same person? Is this actually the same actor? Because he's way better in this, and it's only 2 years later. I love John Hall as a villain. John Hall is a fantastic bad guy, plays insane so well, very convincing, very menacing. Great job, John Hall. And I really liked John Carradine's performance, and I kind of really liked everyone's performance. I thought everyone did a good job. So that is it for The Invisible Man's Revenge from 1944. I think I want to call it the last film in the main series, because the next film is Abbott and Costello Meet the Invisible Man, and it's, of course, likely its own continuity, just like the Frankenstein and Mummy ones. I'm very interested to see how it turned out, because Abbott and Costello met a bunch of horror characters. They met, like, a bunch of sci-fi aliens from Mars. They met Frankenstein and Mummy, which I've already reviewed. They met Jekyll and Hyde. They met, like, Boris Karloff, probably as himself. I haven't seen that film. I've only seen Frankenstein and Mummy with Abbott and Costello, and it's weird, because I consider Abbott and Costello Meet Frankenstein to be the best horror comedy of all time. But I also consider Abbott and Costello Meet the Mummy to be the worst horror comedy of all time. So I'm very interested to see which way Abbott and Costello Meet the Invisible Man goes, because it was kind of teased at the end of Abbott and Costello Meet Frankenstein. That's the last scene in that movie. They're in the boat, and then they find out the Invisible Man's in the boat, and they jump out. So that's it for this movie. Thank you all very much for your support. I'm sorry if I talked a little fast. I'm just very excited about this film. I really liked it. I was excited to have it return back to its horror roots. I thought it was going to be a sequel, but it was really a reboot, and I just loved it. Ugh, I really liked it a lot. So that's it. Thank you all once again, and I'll see you all next time when we review Abbott and Costello Meet the Invisible Man.